we're going to come through more difficult times. I think the next 3 to 5 years will be difficult times in ways that haven't existed in their lifetime, but has existed in other periods of time, like the 1930 to 45 period. So to be able to adapt well, to invent yourself, again, to adapt, and to navigate that, maybe with a perspective of knowing what those other times were like, is the best thing to do.
It's difficult because when you start to think, okay, what's healthy? Well, earn more than you spend. Well, that's not so easy because, what does that mean? Go earn more? I mean, okay, that's not so easy. Spend less? That isn't going to work. So now what do? Okay, you have this debt that you then monetize, and that's why it's classic. So yes, that's why these cycles occur, because what happened before created the lay of the land that is then increasingly difficult to deal with.
The most important force over a long period of time is man's adaptability and inventiveness. And now we have a greater ability. And that's the plus. It's all a matter of basics. Do you earn more than you spend? Okay, do you have a good income statement? And do you have a good balance sheet? If you do those things, you will be financially capable, strong, and so you're going to do things better and better, and you'll be strong.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve will buy government bonds, which is the equivalent, I will lend to you. And that's what happens. And that's happened through history. So what we're going through is the same process as happened in the 1930 to 1945 period. So as I was saying, there are 3 important things. That is one. The second is large wealth gap. Third is that we have a rising power in the form of China emerging to compete or challenge the United States leadership. So when you have these 3 things together, it's a challenging mix, and it's happened repeatedly. Less effective monetary and credit system makes it, they have to print a lot of money, can threaten the value of money. Second, when you have a large wealth gap and you have an economic downturn, people are more inclined to have conflict. So how that's dealt with, we're going to reconsider how that wealth will be divided. And that'll change taxes and relationships. And then the third is we're no longer in a world order where the United States is the only dominant power. And one of my main principles is there's always a path out there. You just don't happen to see the path now. So you have to find the path. The way you find that path is to speak to other people, get many ideas by other people. Trial and error, you got to keep at it. Like when you're getting a job, it's the same for every individual, same for every company, same. And if you understand this, the first is look at your income, your expenses, and your savings. And then do a stress test so that you get yourself secure. If you were to lose your income, or if the income were to fall beyond a certain level, and you play that out, maybe that means you go get unemployment insurance, or whatever. How long can you live in an acceptable lifestyle? And do you have a savings that is adequate for that? Okay, so what you do is you calculate, if I lived in a simpler lifestyle and I had this amount of earnings, how many months or years could I live acceptably? Then you look at what do you put the money in? What do you save in? you don't have to make your decisions in your own head. Okay? Now, when you start to realize that you know what you're good at and what you're bad at, that a power comes to you when you start to know, okay, who's the best person to give me the advice, or who's the best person to lead me through this, or when you start to know that you can go beyond what you think and your opinionatedness so that you can triangulate. I call it triangulate with others, so that you find 3 people who are really capable of giving you good advice, who will argue with each other and argue with you so you can see all sides of it, and you work yourself through. So it's not just your eyes looking for the path, but it's other people's eyes looking with the path with you, knowing that you're going to have successes and failures. But that power of that collective learning and triangulate well with humbleness is a great power as you go through that cycle. Once you have a fear that you might be wrong, but you have still the audaciousness and courage to go forward, you're a lot smarter than the person who thinks they know. I'm seeing a number of people who are going broke. And I've watched this over many years. And really, it's just the adjustment process. Once they get to that point where, they get settled, they're fine. It's the ambiguity, it's the worry, it's the stress. So if you do that from the beginning and you have that played out in your head, then you know everything from there you can play with, and it's icing on the cake. So I want to emphasize, you can budget for that, you can look at that, find that scenario, find what that looks like so that you know you've got it down. Then you know you're safe. Once you've got safe, everything beyond that is luxury. Many people in your audience who can plan for a simple lifestyle that can be wonderful. Sometimes we acquire these needs that aren't anywhere near as big as we make them out to be. Do you have a bed to sleep in? Do you have food to eat? Do you have basic health care? Okay, if you start to think, okay, what are my needs that I really need and I'm okay? And how can I make provisions for those needs? Then once you've got that in your mind, you're free, okay? You can go beyond that. You may say, listen, I can do that for a year or 2 years or a month or whatever. But I think we visualize too much the things that we're used to. One of the good things about this exercise is that it brings you back to basics. You can be brought to basics. And like I'm saying, if you have a bed to sleep in and you've got food and so on, and you have those basics and good relationships with people who care about you and basic health care. So if you budget for that and you figure how do you have it, maybe it isn't in the luxurious place you're in. Maybe it's in the country and so on. Once you visualize that and you get that down in your head and you say, I can get that, then your stress will disappear, because as you visualize that, in many ways, that's a happy life. It doesn't take a lot. There's stimulation, there's nature, there's relationships. These fundamental, wonderful things, the most important things, can be obtained in terms of any environment. The lessons that we get over and over again is that you can't be sure what the next environment and twists and turns are. What you don't know is greater than anything you do know. In terms of investing, what that means is you need to know how to diversify well. That's the most important thing. In terms of any aspect in life, to know how to deal with what you don't know is more important than anything you know, because the world is so much more surprising than you can really be sure of. So in a general sense for skills, I mean, I think, and skills are part of what are your environment. Find out those things that are self-sufficient and maintain flexibility. You have to know how to maintain flexibility and change well. If your career is in one area, you have to know you have to develop the skill for changing a career. And that all comes down to knowing how to find the path, to know how to triangulate well with others. And I love my game. My game is to learn about the world, interact with the world, and bet on it. And I'm very curious. I mean, you have to know your nature, and then you can find your role. You have to pick those things that are for your nature and align those things I'm talking about. All currencies eventually die, and all empires eventually diminish, and there are other empires. And the question is essentially the pace of how that happens. I think that, but for most of your listeners, it's most likely going to happen in a way that's tolerable if you can manage it well. Think about the decline of the British Empire, and you see people who are living in London and so on. It's not that the world blows up, it's that they have to readapt, and they know how to readapt. The same things happen over and over again for basically the same reasons. And once you get that, and you have the self-discipline to know how to play the game well, then you'll be fine.
We are in an intellectual revolution that our capacity to invent and think and use technologies to help us think has never been greater than before. And so those revolutionary type of technologies, when they're cutting edge, I think that those are good investments. And I think then what you have to do is also diversify. That because the thing I learned is it's all return in relation to risk. Everybody looks at how much return you make, but it only takes one time to knock you out.
The evolution of Bitcoin over the years is one of the things that has influenced changes in my view. At the same time, it is one of those assets that is an alternative money. I think we're entering an era where there's going to be a competition of monies. Because of the printing of fiat money and the depreciated value, there will be a competition of monies, and Bitcoin is part of that competition. But there'll be many monies, not just crypto monies, but there'll be central bank crypto monies, but there'll be different kinds of monies. And even monies are things that you buy and sell. NFTs can become a money, a type of money. You own it and it's an investment, and you could say, I'd rather own it than own Bitcoin. This stuff is happening. Yeah. This stuff is real, okay? And how it operates. But like all new real things, some are going to go and some are going to, it's like in the internet in the year 2000, pets.com could have been but maybe pets.com doesn't make it, and who knows. That's the beauty of the competitive system, that it'll evolve, and some things will be treasured and some things will be trashed. So, but when I look at it, I think we are in an environment of, what is an alternative money? A money has two purposes: a medium of exchange and a storehold of wealth. I look at it as an alternative gold. Gold has been, for many thousands of years, universally recognized as a source of money. And central banks, it's the third largest source of money in central bank reserves. And I don't think Bitcoin is going to serve those types of purposes and so on. So for various reasons, I prefer gold to the other, but it's a little bit part of my mix. Basically, if you use gold as a measure, it just makes no sense that it's going to be used that much more. Am I sure about that? I'm not sure about anything. But logically, it seems to me that there's a limitation on its price in relationship to other things that are like it.
Important things that are happening in the world now are that we're at the end, late in a long-term debt cycle in which central banks cannot control monetary policy the same way. They can't lower interest rates. They can't get money to a lot of people who need the money.
See, I don't think we're going to have a sustainable interest rate that is going to be a real adequate interest rate. And so I would stay away from debt issues. Now, the interest rates went from ridiculously stupid interest rates, and they're coming into an area that still I think is too low, but it's not as ridiculous as it was before. Okay, what would be the equilibrium interest rate for the equilibrium of inflation rate, okay? We're going to have probably maybe somewhere between a structural employment inflation rate, maybe in the vicinity of between 4 and 5%. In a highly uncertain environment, you can't even be sure of that, but let's say that. That means then what is the real bond yield? Okay, so you have to go to that. We now have about a 1.5% real bond yield. Do you still have a 1%? So you have to have the bond yield give you something. I don't know what that is, but that brings it above 4.5% to some other number. And you have to have relatively tight money, which means that you have a fairly flat yield curve. So I don't know whether that's 4.5% or the economy could not take an interest rate much higher than that before it's going to be negative. So those are the things that enter into my thinking in terms of what markets and what the portfolio would look like.
Be financially sound, earn more than you spend, be strong in these ways, and pretty much everything will take care of itself.